All right, we've got a cross post from the From Coach to Business podcast. This is a podcast season that we just released. My friend Brandon and I both get asked with some frequency about starting and growing fitness businesses, brick and mortar gyms, online coaching, etc. So there's also a lot of really terrible advice in that area. So we put together a podcast season that answers some of the most common questions that we get and also gives people a pretty solid framework on actually starting and growing their fitness business. And this episode, I think, has some application outside of folks who are in the weeds coaching people. It's with Tiago Forte, who is a digital organization, prioritization, productivity expert. So he has some pretty solid frameworks for thinking about how to organize your files and then also how to just have a solid relationship with software and to quote unquote build your second brain. So check this one out. If you are a coach or a fitness business owner, you might enjoy the full From Coach to Business season. There's 15 episodes of that, and you can find that at fromcoachtobusiness.com or just search from Coach to Business in your podcast player of choice. All right, enjoy. Welcome to the From Coach to Business podcast. I'm Todd. My friend Brandon and I have grown frustrated with the advice out there for coaches looking to start or grow their businesses. So we recorded some podcasts to help folks avoid some of the mistakes that we made when we were starting out. You can download our cheat sheet on starting and growing your fitness business at fromcoachtobusiness.com. It includes advice from our expert guests, as well as checklists and action items from each of our episodes. All right, so today we're going to continue talking about productivity and prioritization, and this time it's not just going to be Brandon and I rambling and pontificating about our own beliefs and opinions about how this should be done, but we have Tiago Forte on with us, who is a well-known and respected internet content creator in the areas of productivity prioritization, has some pretty insightful stuff on his website, especially for folks who are interested in the getting things done method and derivations thereof, which from previous episodes, I think you listeners have gathered that Brandon and I are proponents of those styles of thinking. So, throughout the season, we're thinking about a coach who's trying to get started with a business, whether that's looking to open a facility, whether that's trying to go from a few clients to enough clients that you may look at actually making a stable side income from it, or potentially trying to quit like a normal corporate job to go into fitness, which is challenging, right? To actually keep track of all this stuff, because you're coaching your clients, you're potentially coaching some classes at a CrossFit gym. We're telling you that you have to have some sort of a website with a call to action and a way to actually book clients. You're maybe trying to get some of the business licensing stuff done that we've talked about in previous episodes. And there's just like too much going on, and it's really hard to keep track of, and projects are constantly stuck, and you're frustrated, and you just are dropping the ball and having a hard time getting traction going. So I don't know how to deal with this. Tiago, what do I do? How do I make this work?
Yeah, good introduction, Todd. I'm a professional pontificator, so let's get into it.
A double P, if you will.
Yes, certified and authorized by no one. So I'm excited to talk to you guys because I work with a lot. In fact, probably most of my customers and my students, I teach a series of courses, are in some capacity self-employed, or they're entrepreneurs, or they're freelancers, or sometimes our contractors have a side gig, or otherwise have just a lot of autonomy and decision-making ability, like range of decisions they can make about how to work. And your audience sounds like it fits squarely into that domain where you start this business and it's like, oh, I need to wear these 15 hats instead of the one that I was wearing in my previous job. And I have, a number of frameworks and techniques that I teach, that I write about, that I post on social media. But the one it sounds like that you guys kind of connected with, and a good place to start, is one called PARA. And PARA is an acronym, PARA, and those letters stand for projects, areas, resources, and archives. And PARA sounds unbelievable, but is basically a way to completely organize your entire digital life in very little time, in let's say an hour. And the way it does that is it breaks down, like if you think of the huge array of kinds of information you have to deal with, right? Like just like think about it for a sec. Like there's information about your customers, about each one of them. There's information about the building and how to manage the logistics. There's information about marketing. There's information about, then your personal life, and then, the legal stuff, and then the marketing stuff. There's just an endless variety. My argument is that all of that, 100% of it, can fit into one of four categories. And it's those four same categories everywhere in your email, the file system on your computer, your Google Docs, your note taking app, like anywhere. So we can get into that if you want, but it's really a digital organizational system. Shall we go through the categories?
Yeah, let's talk about them. I love a good acronym.
Yeah, right. So the main ones that I think we probably want to focus on is the P and the A, projects and areas. And basically, the reason this is so powerful is you can kind of get everything that you're involved in your life and just break it down into one of these two categories, which are very different. So you think projects, right? Everything in your life is one of the two options is it's a project. So what is a project? It has a beginning date. It has an end date. It has a goal or an intention of some kind that can be reached or not reached. It's finite, it's contained. You can draw like a line around it, right? Like, I don't know, upgrading the equipment in your gym. That's a project. Beginning, ending, there's a clear goal. And one of the most powerful exercises I have people do is to make a list of your projects. Like, if you really sit down right now, just take an hour, list every single project you're committed to, and not just like big things like start a business, but like create that scheduling program, publish the website, install the mats on the floor. Like, even these mini projects, what you're going to see, I can guarantee, is that you have somewhere between like 30 to 60 projects. And most people just aren't aware of that. They think, oh yeah, I have a good 10 or 15 things I'm doing, but it's actually much more. And then the other category is areas. So there are these other things that you're committed to that are just recurring responsibilities, right? Like, let's say something like finances. Your finances are not a project. Why? Because they never end. Hopefully, right?
Never-ending piles of money. That's really what I would say. Is a typical outcome for a fitness business is just so much money that you don't even have to be concerned with your finances. And I think that's where most of our listeners are at right now. So yeah.
Yeah. Great.
I'm cool. Joking in case anyone is unclear.
Exactly. Health. That's another one, right? I'm sure you see people, I'm sure your listeners talk to people who think of their health as a project, right? Like a beginning, and like it's useful to do this for a period, right? I'm going to get in shape. I'm going to lose this many pounds. I'm going to deadlift this many pounds. But if it's only a project, once you reach that goal, it's like you wash your hands and then you're quote unquote done. And then you just, fall off the wagon. There's no kind of recurring habits. And that's it. That's really the two kinds of commitments in your life. And what I find is that when people just make that distinction, things become so much clearer, because their project list is things that they're completing. Their areas are things that they're maintaining.
Sure. And do ahead, projects need to, all projects fit within an area?
They do. Great question. So there is a relationship, right? And a great way to actually generate a project list, like, it's actually kind of hard to sit down and just make a list. But a great way to do that is go through the areas of your life, right? Like, those are pretty standard for most people. Things like health, finances, your apartment, your car, your partner or spouse, your kids, your legal matters, your just things like this. These kind of like dozen or so domains of your life. If you just go one by one through those and think, okay, what are the projects I'm doing in this area? You'll easily come up with that list that I mentioned.
And with projects, I think that's a pretty important concept to understand, right? That like you mentioned, these projects have a clear box around it where it's like, when this outcome is completed, this project is in fact completed as well. I think that's something that can be very difficult for people to categorize properly, that people can potentially either come up with like much more tangible, specific to-do list items that aren't really a project per se. And then they can also have these sort of like nebulous outcomes that it's not really ever clear if the project is completed or not. So it ends up being this sort of like hanging, like haunting specter that's just ruining their lives and occupying mental real estate. So how do you recommend that people get clarity surrounding what is in fact a project and how to appropriately define it relative to like different, I guess, scale compared to just say like a specific action item?
Yeah, great question. So there's two pitfalls that I see in defining projects. So the two things that are most important in defining a project, really that make a project, are the deadline and the outcome, right? So first, like I said, the very definition of a project is it has to end. So, whether you call it a deadline or a timeline or a milestone or a whatever you call it, there's got to be a day where you say it's got to be done by this time. Otherwise, it's that open-ended thing you mentioned. And that one's pretty straightforward. You just pick a day. But the harder one is the outcome. And this is also an essential ingredient because projects need an outcome, right? I always say a project without an outcome is a hobby. That's something that you're just doing and you might enjoy it. You might be a casual thing you're doing, but it has no sort of objective. And there's two pitfalls I see when people identify outcomes, which is really just goal setting, right? Like when setting goals. One is they make it actually too small and too concrete. And I'll see people where they define projects as just finishing the project, right? So they'll say, okay, on their project list, let's just say, paint the walls of the gym. That's the project. Then I go, what's the outcome? Walls are painted. It's like, well, that is true, but it's a tautology. It's just obvious, right? And so what I ask them to do if I see that is to aspire. It may sound dumb, but what is outstanding success in the painting of these walls look like? Like set a criteria, set a standard, set some sort of clear thing that will happen or not that you could define that. So it might be, walls are painted with 3 coats and they're not peeling and the color is even and the atmosphere in the gym is improved. Like that's a pretty clear outcome, right? But then the other pitfall that I see is people being too lofty and ambitious and too kind of dreamy. Transform our community and completely revolutionize the health of every single man, woman, child, and pet in this whole zip code. It's like, that's inspiring. That may actually be super inspiring to you, but it provides no guidance in your day-to-day work. And so it's funny, I'll give different people different advice based on what I see in their project list, but I'm trying to calibrate where it's concrete enough to give you guidance and aspirational enough to really give you something to reach for.
Do you feel like timescale plays a role at all in that? Or maybe that varies by person, but I've seen you recommend that it's helpful to keep projects with relatively short timescales so that you can feel this sense of momentum as you complete projects. It's not like, maybe it takes somebody 2 years to write a book. So perhaps that write a book is a rough project to have, but maybe there's something that would make sense on a shorter timescale for that larger project.
Yes, timing is super important, really, really important. So a couple things. So first, I think what you said is exactly, I would definitely agree. You really need to have a consistent pace of milestones, of victories, right? I mean, I'm sure there's a parallel to fitness. Like if you're not reaching any meaningful progress, you don't see progress, you don't see outcomes, you don't see the numbers increasing, you don't see anything different in the mirror, like it would be inhuman to expect such a person to keep at it, right? So you need these wins, you need victories. And I think this is something about modern work and modern business that is sometimes really hard, is we're kind of starved for wins. Right? Everything is just like continuous, it seems like. As soon as your website is up, even before your website is up, you're already thinking of things that are wrong with it, things you want to change, things you want to improve. As soon as you hit a sales milestone with your members, then you're thinking of the next milestone. It's like we never just stop, celebrate a clear-cut completion. Take a little time off, have a celebration, and then the next day or the next whatever, get to it. So yeah, I really encourage people and you might think, oh, well, that just means I have to be super productive and finish projects at a breakneck pace. I mean, that would be nice, of course, but another easier way to do it is just to make your project smaller. You mentioned the writing a book, right? I've been writing a book the past year. It's going to take me at least another year, but there are, according to this definition, something like 40 or 50 different mini projects within writing a book. It's like seriously 40 to 50. I mean, just the proposal, I've been spending months writing this proposal, and then, finding promotional opportunities. That's a whole nother project. Hiring an editor, another project. Doing each revision of the book is a project. So I really have people define what I sometimes call micro projects, to kind of lower the bar so they can get over the bar faster, so that they can get to this consistent pace of clearing bar after bar. It's just essentially a motivational hack, a motivational tool.
I like that. But one of the other things that I find interesting and compelling about the PARA framework and what you've outlined with that is that it is very flat. It's not this huge hierarchy of things. So how do you reconcile that with this sort of nested project concept?
Yes, that's a good question. Very perceptive. I like it. So yeah, PARA is super flat. I mean, you basically have two levels. Really three. There's PARA, and then you have folders below that, and then the actual content, right? And there's many reasons for that. One is this thing called the magic number 4, which is this thing in psychology that most animals, including humans, when we see a group of 4 objects, we don't have to count them. We can just look at them and go, oh, there's 3 or there's 4. But once you get to 5 or more, you have to count. There's almost like, I've heard different theories, but there's like something in our psychology that up to 4 is something we can instantly grasp. And that's why PARA is 4 categories across and only 3 or 4 categories down. But also there's interesting research on, have you ever heard of filers versus pilers?
No.
So this is some of the most influential work in kind of organizing of the past couple decades. They found that basically people fall into 2 groups. There's filers. So they meticulously get each, at the time it was pieces of paper, and they find the exact file, and they open the file, and they stick it right where it goes. And then there's pilers, which just keep piles of things everywhere.
What if you keep piles of things everywhere with the intention of later filing them and periodically doing so?
That's a in denial piler.
Cool. I identify as such.
Yeah, totally. The grass is greener on the other side, basically. But the interesting thing they found in this research is that pilers in many ways have it better. Everyone wants to be a filer or is happy they're a filer or thinks they should be a filer. But what they found is you see this in TV shows, like where there's 3-foot high piles of stuff on the desk, and then for like a lawyer, and they go, oh, where's that one case file for that one case 3 years ago? And they go right to the spot and they pull out that one piece of paper. It is kind of like that. We actually have this incredible location dependent memory. So PARA is essentially trying to capture the benefits of both. It's capturing the benefits of filing, and that there is a container, right, for a project, for an area, for a resource, that you do put it in there. But it also captures the benefits of piling, and that decision is very easy. It's almost just like sticking it in a pile. It's not like drilling down to psychology and then sub categories. And that's kind of my thinking around combining the best of both worlds.
So in your personal filing system, what does your book folder look like for your project? Do you have multiple folders in there for those other projects? How is the pile/file thing arranged?
Yeah, so this is an interesting thing. The whole idea behind PARA is that information is dynamic, not static, right? So the whole idea with PARA, you'll notice it's not based on category, which is how almost everyone everywhere organizes things, right? Like what category, what topic does this go under? In PARA, what's most important is not the topic, it's the project, right? How am I going to use this? How is it useful? How is it valuable? How is it actionable? It's like your personal flow of goals and things you're working on is the most important priority. But what that means is things can change their category, change the bucket they fall into, right? So I'll give you an example. Often something will start as a project, right? Like let's say I'm researching, a real example. I'm researching email marketing, right? So I took an online course on email marketing. That's clearly a project. There's a beginning, there's an ending, there's a goal. But then when the project was done, before filing that project in the archives, which is the last letter of PARA, I noticed there were some things that I wanted to keep going, right? Obviously, you take a course, you want to keep some of those things going. So some of those little notes went into a new area called email marketing, right? But then things also sometimes go into resources, which is the third category, the third bucket, which we didn't talk about. just related to different aspects of email marketing, like email autoresponders or tripwires or lead magnets. So you see, it's almost like there are four buckets that have tubes interconnecting, where information, in this case notes, is constantly flowing between them as your mix of projects changes. So one last thing with the book, it's interesting. Sometimes you have like a mega project, right? It's like a project of projects. And what I'm actually finding, this is something I'm just noticing the past few months, is that it's actually found throughout my whole system, right? It's almost like my whole, what I call my second brain, which is what I call, the course I teach is called Building a Second Brain. Your second brain is just a centralized repository of all your ideas, all your knowledge, your expertise, your notes. So I find that my whole second brain is being almost like brainwashed. It's like the whole thing is morphing around the needs of this book. So some of the parts of the book are projects, some are areas, some are resources, and some are archives. It's grown bigger than any one bucket can contain.
And I think that the concept of a book is probably pretty similar to a fitness business, and that there's so many different projects within that that require a variety of different skill sets too. I mean, just within this podcast season itself, we have these different buckets that we're talking about. And, a lot of people are potentially listening to this because they like coaching, for example. But a lot of the stuff that they're going to actually have to do is related to, email marketing, website design, like developing the emotional resilience and persistence to repeatedly speak to someone with your state, licensing department about why you don't have a specific number. You need to file some other form that you need to file some other form. Like that, these are all, just like the things that are actually the day-to-day of, trying to start a business or grow a business that aren't necessarily the skill set that, you love, or that you got into this for.
Totally. And that's something I noticed with entrepreneurs is like the one of the great paradoxes of entrepreneurship is that you have to be totally singularly focused, like a laser on that business you're growing. But at the same time, so often in business, the great opportunities are adjacent. They're just to the side. They're just orthogonal to what you're doing. So you have to be simultaneously laser focused and open-minded to the periphery. And this is what I recommend people use their second brain for. Like your first brain, you're the business owner, you're the entrepreneur, focus on your business. But in the background, in this using technology, which is so powerful these days, just be collecting little ideas, little possibilities, new marketing ideas, new ideas for blog posts, new ideas for products you could launch, there's constant background activity that you can just capture in little snippets of notes. And that's kind of how I think this stuff fits into entrepreneurship.
And I think
so. I wanted to circle back to I wanted to circle back on the some of the ideas related to defining projects, because I think that's something else that can be a potential pitfall here is relating projects to things like KPIs, like key performance indicators, or OKRs, objectives and key results, which are some frameworks that we have talked about or will talk about in a future episode, depending on what order you're listening to this in and what order we actually post it in. But we do encourage people to have some like tangible business goals, right? Let's say I can use a real life example since I think that's helpful. We're trying to get 80% of our consultations who actually book one to legitimately show up and come in, right? And if we look on a quarterly basis, that number typically hovers between like 65 and 75% of people who actually book a consultation show up. So for us, we're thinking, how can we increase that number, right? That improves the quality of life of our coaches, since no-shows are stressful. If more people are actually showing up, then we are potentially converting more of them. So this is a number that we want to change. How do we relate something like that to like specific projects?
Okay. Interesting. It's a great example. I love that. Here's how I would think about it. So all those essentially ways of defining goals, whether it's KPIs, OKRs, there's many different models are wonderful, but I think this comes back to the distinction between projects and areas. So, appointment scheduling or what would you call it? Session delivery is an area. Sure. Like it's ongoing. It's never going to end, hopefully. It is a responsibility that you have. It's one of the hats that you wear in your business. And it has a standard to be maintained. That's the other key characteristic of an area. It's not just you keep doing something at whatever level. It's like, say, your marriage. Your marriage has a standard. It may be better at times or worse at times, but there's probably like a line that you don't want it to go below. Session delivery, I'll just call it, or just training sessions, is an area. But then within that area, you think of it like a sine wave. It's this wave that's ongoing, going up and down, up and down. Within that, there are discrete projects, and they have to be run as projects. So let's say what you just mentioned, like a very clear project would be increase average attendance rate from 60% to 80%, right? That has a beginning and an ending and a goal. That's a clear project. And if you look at what's going to be required to make that happen, it's all project stuff. It's going to require focus. It's going to require relentless execution. It's going to require clearing away obstacles, trying different things. It's very like aggressive, very like the hunter, right? Whereas areas are more like the farmer. It's more like you're cultivating something. But then once you hit that 80%, you can say the project is done. We did it. We finished. We celebrate. But then what parts of what we've been doing do we want to institutionalize and make that part of the area, which means making it part of routines, schedules, habits, systems.
Yeah, and to give some insight into that, just based upon what we're actually working on, again, because I think making it tangible is helpful. What we're trying to do is give the coaches who are booking appointments or being booked for appointments more responsibility relative to actually making sure that those people show up, right? So rather than just relying on the automated scheduling reminders, which are okay, we want the coaches reaching out to people proactively, just saying, hey, listen, like I saw you booked an appointment next Wednesday at this time. I see that you've, indicated that you're interested in our weightlifting program. Like, that's awesome. Do you have any weightlifting experience? Let me know. I'll see you next week. Right. And just that personal touch, we hypothesize, is going to make people less likely to just flat out no show, right? At least they can respond and cancel and say, hey, listen, like it's not going to work out. And we'll see how well it actually works. But, that's something that, through a series of projects, which, essentially is like, can we build up a system that facilitates coaches doing that? Because they're pretty good on Slack and not so good on email. So can we create a series of like automated Slack messages that remind coaches to follow up with people who book appointments? Can we roll it out in various meetings such that they understand the process? Can we check on it to see how many of those messages are being sent? Okay, once this is actually happening, then it becomes part of the area in terms of, like you said, appointment delivery, that this is just like a recurring, consistent part of that aspect of the business.
Exactly. Wonderful example. And what, even the way you described that reminded me of one of my big inspirations, which is the E-Myth. Do you guys know Michael Gerber? Yep. E-Myth? It was one of the first business books I read back when I was like in community college. But often, and this is relevant to your audience, often projects need executive attention. Right? If you're installing a new CRM, that's not something you're going to delegate to your, minimum wage high school desk receptionist, right? That needs decision making. It needs real, like, hard decisions. But then once it's systematized, you can often hand it off. Once the project is done, it can become a checklist. It can become just a training, can become a video that people watch. So it's almost like as a business owner, you can kind of distinguish between the things you should be focused on, which is those ambiguous decisions, and constantly be throwing off, kind of spinning off little systems and little processes that you can then give to someone who doesn't have the skills that you have.
I think along those lines too, you made the distinction that when you're doing projects, it's a different mindset than when you're reflecting on areas. Projects are very action oriented. Areas require introspection and forward thinking and planning and so forth. How do you balance the two of those? How are you like once a week reflecting on areas, and then during the week is just, execute time? How does those two things fit together?
Totally. Yeah. This comes straight from David Allen. I mean, he used the analogy of like elevations in an airplane, right? When you're at 5,000 feet, you see and pay attention to very different things. You're picking out cars. You can see little like people's swimming pools. Then when you're at 10,000, 20,000, all the way up to, I think he says 50,000, And I just do it as a series of nested reviews. I have a weekly review that I do once or sometimes even twice a week, that are like the most on the ground tactical current priorities. Then a monthly review that's a little bit higher, more like areas. Then I do a quarterly review that's more about finances. It's more like profitability, margins, which products I want to focus on more, which ones less. Then this sounds really crazy how many of them, but it's really like, weekly review takes 20 minutes, monthly review takes half an hour. It's really not huge. And I find the perspective I gain, right, the higher elevation you gain. So I should finish. I have a mid-year review and then an annual review, all nested within each other. And I don't do those like hyper religiously. Often a month or 2 or 3 will pass. And, if I'm heads down on something, I don't do my monthly reviews, or I'll do the mid-year review in August because I'm 2 months late. Like I'm not really crazy about it. It just gives me so much perspective. I mean, your listeners can't see this, but all the Post-its on the wall behind me are like the output of my reviews. It's basically a high level prioritization process. And often at the end of my monthly reviews, all that happens is I walk up to this wall. This is in our spare bedroom. I rearrange some Post-its, and that's all that happened. But in my mind, there's a clear shift in priority.
And I think that taking the time to do that, and you're saying it only takes you 20, 30 minutes, and perhaps that's a refined process, and maybe the first few times it takes longer, even a day, but that's a missing element for so many people getting started in business, especially because they want to have their head down and feel like they're doing something, like they're always executing, but in fact, they end up working on things that are of low value when they do that because they haven't taken the time to make sure that they're sort of, to use a popular analogy, like climbing the right ladder.
Yeah, it's so true. I always say what the absolute fastest way to execute a task is? To not do it at all.
Right.
And I find so often in my reviews, like I get toward the end and what's clarified is the no's. The things that I said, I was kind of said, oh, fine, I'll do that. Or, oh yeah, I can probably fit that in. Or, oh, I should probably get to that. It's like the shoulds, the ought tos, the obligations, the really marginal stuff. And if, you spend, a couple hours doing that, yeah, that's a solid block of time. But think about, if you eliminate 10 or 20% of your to-do list, or even bigger, 10 or 20% of your project list, that often it's just crazy to me. There's whole projects that I've somehow said yes to, like maybe I've like, this just happened. I said, for some reason, I said yes to flying from Mexico City, where I live, to Arizona to speak at a cryptocurrency conference.
Sick.
Like, sick, right? Like I probably said yes because I was like, cool, that sounds neat, right? Not knowing all the other things I'd be doing in October, I said yes. But in my last review, I looked at that. I'm just like, what the hell? That has nothing to do with anything that I care about. And I had to write her back and say, I'm sorry, I can't do it. But what did that save me in time? Days.
Yeah, absolutely. So
but it cost you some serious Bitcoin gains.
The output of these review sessions, is it really just literally slashing some ongoing projects that have been sitting on your to-do list and like getting delayed, and adding new ones that seem more relevant? Is that really the sum of the review?
Pretty much. Yeah, it's adding, it's subtracting, it's reframing, redefining. It's making goals more aspirational, more tactical. It's like can go either way on each of these. But it's funny, like day to day to really get things done, you can't afford to have perspective, right? Like so much of doing really great work is about obsessing. Like you lose consciousness of time and space. You forget to eat. You forget to shave. You just go into this like this kind of manic creativity, and then you create something. You're just like amazed by it, right? So like if you have too much perspective, you're always 100% balanced at all times. That's actually really unproductive because you can't let yourself fall into those states. But then equally, you can't, if you're like that all the time, your life is going to go to complete hell. So then you need to come back and regain perspective. And that's what reviews are for. It's a perspective generating activity. And one more thing I was going to say, the key to making it short, like this is really the key, is a review is reviewing things, not doing things. It's so easy as you're reviewing, oh, this task and that task and this project, to just immediately just go, oh, well, I could knock this off in an hour. I could knock this off in 2 hours. That's how a review starts taking days or weeks. You have to stay at the meta level, almost like you're the CEO of the company. I mean, in many cases, you are the CEO of the company. You're not executing anything. Your time is too valuable to execute a thing. All you can afford to do is rearrange the pieces and sort of coordinate things.
So what would it look like for you to reprioritize some projects during a review? Like what actually happens? You're like, okay, I'm going to push this one to the top of the pile. I'm scheduling time on my calendar to do this task. What decisions are you actually making?
Yeah, it's I've tried making it more explicit where I'm like really make it into a science. I think there's a limit to how much you can completely make it into a process. So I think I've kind of pulled back from that, where now I just kind of, for example, in my monthly review, I'll look at each of my areas and just really do it more intuitively, do it more by like what my body is telling me, my instincts, my intuition. Like I'll look at each area, which I have listed in my task manager, and go finances. And I'll just kind of like look at the wall, look at the ceiling, and just think, and just like sense for something that is dissatisfied, something that is worrying me, something that is irritating me. And often those things just come right to mind, right? Like that's the idea of open loops. Those things are often, they're in the back of your brain, bugging you, bothering you, provoking you. And if you just stop for a minute, they come right to the surface. And then those often become new projects, right? Like this just happened. My budgeting software, I use this thing called YNAB, You Need a Budget, which I love. It's having some sort of error, right? Actually, this is more of a task, not a project, but there was some research that I needed to do, right? And as soon as I just realized that was really bugging me because my budgets are all over the place, I was like, oh, okay, I have to make a little micro project, research this, whatever synchronization issue, fix it, redo my budgets. And that just provided this immense sense of relief, just identifying what was already preoccupying me.
So it seems like there's some intuition there, but do you find that in doing that and sort of chasing intuition that maybe there's a lack of an underlying strategy toward, some larger end?
Yeah, great, very perceptive once again. So this kind of comes back to my basic approach to these things. Like if you really zoom out, I'm fundamentally bottom up. So the history of productivity largely is top down, right? It's like, what's the plan? And then decompose the plan down into smaller and smaller goals, and then sub goals, and then milestones, and then outcomes. Or what's the strategy? And then that gives you the tactics, and the tactics give you, it's like waterfall basically. And there's a few reasons that I'm bottom up. One is my main influence getting things done is also very bottom up, right? Like if you look at GTD doesn't tell you what's your goal and then filter all the way down to tasks. You start with the tasks. You start with what is occupying your mind right now, and then you build up slowly. And I think one reason GTD has succeeded, and one reason that I've succeeded, honestly, is that the more uncertain the world gets and the faster it changes, the more sense it makes to do bottom up. Right? It's kind of like guerrilla warfare. In a guerrilla war, you don't like slowly bureaucratically say like, oh, what does the president think? And then he tells the generals, and the generals tell the sergeants, all the way down. You just go like, it's kind of the survival, adaptation, crazy on the ground maneuvering. And that's what a lot of the world feels more and more like.
So you don't end up after a month of just like, man, I'll tell you what, I don't have any new clients. My business is worse for wear, but my budget is on point.
Exactly. The faster things change, the less likely your plan is going to be true or even make sense or even be the right thing.
So the point of the system is to create a space for you as an individual to kind of make these more like ad hoc or quick decisions about what is actually important in that moment, what is bothering you in that moment, what needs to be worked on in that moment, and that you're almost thinking of yourself as like a collection of your future selves and the potential things that you could be doing at any given moment, and you're trying to give yourself in the future like maximum flexibility to make those decisions without kind of getting caught up in something overly rigid and overly structured that actually limits your capacity to adapt. Is that like a good way of thinking of that?
Perfect. Yeah. And what you just described has examples in military terms, in business, in manufacturing. It's like you see it everywhere. Is a quickly changing world necessitates more bottom up thinking. Yeah, I would say that's kind of this really broad trend that is now reaching. We used to be protected from it because we were inside organizations, and the organization might succeed or fail, but we were sort of insulated from that. Now, even as a solo business owner, you are subject to global economic trends. You are subject to overseas competition. You are subject to automation. So you have to be adaptive at a whole different level than was required when you had, you could depend on a 9-to-5 job.
I think one of the really powerful pieces of this being not rigid and lending itself to like moments of inspiration or however you want to refer to that is like we have this idea of like maybe we decided we wanted to start a podcast as a marketing channel for our gym, but it's not something that we actively need to be doing right now. We know we have these other priorities. However, on a week-to-week basis, maybe we're getting content that pops up in our feed that's like, oh, this is what you need to do to set up a podcast. And ordinarily, maybe we are tempted to read that. But through your system, it's more like, okay, I'm going to file that into a resource and possibly refer to that when the time is right, when I uncover that within some larger review. Is that about right too?
Totally. Yeah, it's kind of like you guys know the film Memento. Did you watch that?
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
So really briefly, it's just a guy that has no ability to form short-term memories. Every morning he wakes up with no memory of who he is, what he's doing, what he should be doing, where he should be going. Like he's just a blank person. And I always think that's a great model for productivity in an environment of uncertainty. Like how would you behave if you could not make long-term plans, if you could not predict even a week in advance, if you didn't even know what you were going to do tomorrow? I think what you would do is you would stockpile resources. You would stockpile resources. In his case, it was like, guns and knives and weapons. In our case, it's knowledge. But you stockpile knowledge, and you stockpile it in a way that it's very succinct and summarized and easy to access. Right. And this is the problem with a lot of content, books, let's say. If you have a bookshelf full of books, that is not stockpiled knowledge, because to even find a valuable idea, you'd have to spend hours and hours and hours and hours reading those books. So notes are like processed, digested knowledge, because you can go in there, often I'll read a whole book and save one quote from the whole book. That's like the digested, the little core nugget, the diamond of insight that I need, and I can pick it up in 5 seconds. I think that's what you do in an environment of uncertainty. And sometimes when the plans do work out, it's still good to have those resources. It's not like you're betting one way or the other. You're just biased towards the uncertainty.
So if we think about the concept of a second brain, which you touched on briefly, and is kind of like let's say tangential to the para framework in terms of thinking about different projects and areas and understanding how to sort of like organize the tasks that we have to do as well as the information that we're encountering. What does it look like for someone to create, this second brain that allows them to outsource keeping track of their projects, outsource keeping track of their various nuggets of information that they come across, and really, allow, let's say, digital systems, or you could easily do something like this with pen and paper as well, to keep track of all those things so that they are maximally adaptable to this uncertain environment? Like what tangibly should people be doing?
Yeah, so I mean, really, my whole focus these days is on this idea of building a second brain, of having the centralized repository of knowledge. And the way I ask people to think of this is, you want a note-taking app, right? So a note-taking app, and there's many kinds for every operating system, every device. I use Evernote. You can use Microsoft OneNote. You can use Google Keep. You can use Notion. You can use Bear, Simple Notes, even Apple Notes. I mean, there's endless options, and they're all fine. I've never come across a Notes app that like didn't work for what I'm talking about. And to think of this as your second brain, to think of it as like your personal library, like your personal encyclopedia. So anytime you come across something and you're already, this isn't like you have to go out and like find knowledge, there's research that the average person today consumes 30 gigabytes of information a day. 30 gigabytes. If you take all the audio, all the video, all the imagery, all the text, and converted it to like your hard drive, it would be 30 gigabytes. So just get the top 0.0001%, a handful of notes per day, and save them in these note-taking apps, which is easy because note-taking apps, what they really specialize in is capture, right? Like Evernote has probably 20 different ways to get something into Evernote from any source you can imagine. And to organize those notes by your projects. Just make a list of your projects, create a folder or notebook for each one. And every time you come across something that could be related in some way to one of them, just save it. And over time, people see my system when I do my screen shares. I have like 6,000 notes that I've captured over like 7 years. And they go, oh, that's, a lifelong pursuit. But if you look at the average, that's 2 notes per day. My long-term average is 2 notes per day. And a note is anything. It can be a photo of a poster that I saw on the street that I was inspired by. It's one quote from one article that I read. Sometimes it's, one clip from one website. Like think of just the past 24 hours, the articles you read or books you read from or podcasts you listened to or websites you read. Were there 2 pieces of content and all of that would be worth saving? And I think you'll find the answer is yes, just save those. It's a matter of seconds to a few minutes per day.
And with that, then, what is the access process like then, right? Because I think a lot of people do have this intuition that, oh, maybe I should be saving some of this stuff, or it might be helpful at some point, and then they never really do anything with it. Sort of like when people take notes in their classes in school, right? They make these crazy outlines and have all this highlighting, and then they never actually go back and review it. So what does it look like for you to utilize this stuff?
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is really what most of the course is about. People come into the course often with notes, in some cases, many, many notes, but then that all-consuming question, how do I organize this? How do I structure it? Para is part of the answer to that. Just going from this morass of random notes to your projects, your areas, your resources, your archive is a huge step up. For many people, that's enough. But then we have a subsequent thing, which is called just-in-time project management. It's like the third pillar of the course. I also have a 21-part series on my blog called Just-in-Time Project Management, but it's paywalled. It's part of my subscription, unfortunately. And it's kind of a little more like down the line, a little more, I guess, advanced, you could say, but it's, how would I summarize it? It's like a series of it's a series of tools that you use, almost like little templates. Thinking tools, you can think of them, to just rapidly search, compile, and structure the notes related to one thing you're creating. So, this morning I wrote a blog post. I just did a few simple little habits to find 5 to 7 notes that were related, summarize them, distill them, put them into an outline, and then use the outline to write the post. So that's probably a little vague, but those are some examples of just, and it's things you learn in school, outlining, summarizing, reinterpreting, rewording, making into a diagram or visual. They're not completely unknown things. It's just like, kind of like you alluded to, we're used to school where all these things are like just an obligation, something we have to do to pass a test. Whereas we are kind of reinventing those kind of student behaviors for knowledge workers, which is a continuous process of learning, not just like a semester or something.
I think it's also important to note that a lot of these behaviors stack, right? So you may see something that looks intimidating, or hearing Tiago talk about his specific system or whatever, right? That it's like, oh, that's nuts, I could never do that. But that, if you start somewhere and you start to develop comfort with some of these concepts, that enables you to build on them, and things that at one point required a lot of cognitive load to do or keep track of become very easy. And then more complex behaviors, like you said, just, I sort of know what my process is for creating a blog post, and I can easily find the notes that are going to give me an idea and create an outline and knock it out. That's really, 15 to 20 stacked behaviors that took you a little bit of time to develop, but then once it's there, it's like, oh yeah, cool, this all makes sense.
Just like in working out, right? Like
Absolutely.
you isolate and learn those movements. I remember I spent like so long just learning like how to pick up a bar. And I was like, this can't be this complicated, but it took me time. But then once it was internalized, then I could like use like it's almost like a little module. You can just slot into different routines, and the more modules you have, just like the more notes you have, the more creativity and just new things you can create out of them.
So something that we haven't really touched on that we talked a little bit about before recording is just the idea of people in the fitness space in particular understanding how to like scale their services, right? So a lot of folks may have some clients who they work with one-on-one. And Tiago, I think you mentioned this before we started recording, just that they don't realize how valuable their knowledge is and how much stuff they know that they may not realize they know relative to the population as a whole. So, what should people be thinking about in terms of expressing their knowledge and sharing what they do know with people who need it, and then utilizing that to help them create a business?
Yes, one of my favorite topics. I really have an immense passion for teaching these like idea management, knowledge management methods, especially to people who have tacit knowledge that can only be delivered in person. Like when I think back to just people I've worked with, like everything from yoga instructors to massage therapists to personal trainers to chiropractors, like those people have changed my life time and time again. Like they've just like touched or modified a part of my body that had positive effects for years. It's absolutely incredible what these people can do. And yet I notice like it's difficult to do that work because you have to be in person. Right? You have to travel there. You have to be there with them. Your time, like an hour with someone, you're not with someone else. And so what I often see is they have to charge a lot, right? And so often that's the game. How can I increase my prices? Increase, go more premium, more elite. But then, often talking to them, I notice that like those are also people who have immense hearts for people. They really love healing and helping and making this knowledge available to everyone. So there's kind of this conflict in the world of I don't know what you would define this world as, like tacit knowledge workers, maybe.
Sure. Well, and I think it's also an issue with, like you were saying, that there's a significant opportunity cost to that time, and that these folks as well. I mean, this is a totally different rabbit hole that we probably shouldn't go down, but related to things like the Baumol effect, meaning that if the economy as a whole is growing, but you yourself are not more productive based upon that you have to charge more for your time relative to the overall economy as a whole. So there's all these things that are potentially pushing up the individual cost of, offering fitness services one-on-one.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I completely get it. You have to make a living and you want to make a good living. But I think there's something here that a lot of people are discovering, which is content creation can really, like if you think about, okay, like your time, say it's 100% of your working time, what percentage of that time are you at your edge? Are you really pushing the boundaries of what you know, utilizing your most rare and scarce and interesting knowledge? And I ask this question a lot, and often it's like, if anything, it's like 10, 20, 30%, right? Like even some pretty elite people, like, if you're an elite coach and you're checking email, maybe there's no way to get email down to zero, but don't fool yourself into thinking that you are working at the extent of your capacity as you're doing what is essentially knowledge work that a high school grad could do, right? Like that's another way of thinking of it. What percentage of your time, you listeners, are you doing stuff that literally a high school graduate could do? And I bet it's in the double digits, maybe high double digits. So I think technology, online content, online courses, all these things that I'm so passionate about, what they can do, they can't, often people try to communicate that top 20%, that can't be done. That has to be done in person in these intensive situations, but you can offload the bottom 80. right? The way, I mean, when I was at my CrossFit gym in Oakland, you wouldn't believe, like, there's this curse of the expert. Like, you guys, all your listeners, you guys have no idea how valuable your knowledge is because you're immersed in it every day, right? Like, when they taught me how to like hold a bar and put my thumb over the other fingers, I was like mind blown. Had no idea. Like, you guys probably don't even remember learning that. It was so long ago. Like, all these little things, how to stand, the angle of your feet, how to do a squat, that I had to put my weights away, which I didn't even know it was a thing. I thought other gyms, people just leave them wherever.
This new guy, Tiago, is very disrespectful.
What a jerk. And those are the kinds of things that are so easily offloaded. Make a PDF, make a booklet, make an online course. And there's a thing too where that becomes the best sales funnel ever. My best coaching clients are people who've already taken my online courses, because we start day one at an advanced level. My best students are ones who've already read my blog posts, because they start the course already having all this background knowledge. The more content you create, the better and the more profitable and the easier your in-person work becomes.
I think that's really insightful, because one of the things that we've talked about is the potential confusion that people have surrounding content creation for a fitness business, right? That people see Instagram influencers and they're like, okay, cool. Like, that's what I need to do because I'm also in fitness. And so they're trying to write, long Instagram captions and like have a professional photographer to take pictures of them. But they're new and just trying to get a few people to pay them for personal training services. And it's like, well, maybe that's not the actual best use of your time right now. There's a lot of other stuff that you could do. But I think that what you're saying is actually related to the process of onboarding people, right? That you have all this stuff that that you don't realize how valuable it is, and that this onboarding process sort of sets the stage for the entire client experience. So if you can understand how to systemize that and just get as much of that knowledge from your brain to their brain as possible when they're getting started, then like we talked about with the other behaviors, it's you're stacking all these habits on top of each other to really get someone like an excellent client experience right out the gate.
Exactly. Yeah, that's really the perspective. It's not a replacement for you. It's not really promotion. It's marketing. Every single day, marketing becomes more and more just education. We're in this content marketing is the hot thing now. Soon it's going to be education marketing, I think. And then it's going to be transformational marketing. Like, the way you market is you create results for them before they even hire you. Like, how's that for, you don't have to convince them of anything. Just look at the results. And so, and of course that's hard. It's hard to do that if you have to spend your own time because you're doing it for free. That's what content can do. It can be your filter. It's your onboarding. It's your pre-customer education. And what you said about Instagram, like, there's something really important here, which is like, all of our social media, especially, behavior is oriented towards scale. Like the likes, the retweets, the shares, all these things, that is just meaningless. My blog is paywalled. Only a few hundred people read my blog posts. But the people that read it, they're my customers. They're my hardcore followers. They're going to take that and they're going to teach their team. They're going to spread it within their company. They're going to write their own pieces of content on my content. It's really the quality of your audience, not the quantity. Like, I can't emphasize that enough. And I would say to go deep. Don't do an Instagram post. That's not going to transform anyone's life. Write an in-depth blog post. Make an hour-long video. Not many people will consume that, but the ones that do will be your customers.
Yeah, I think that point parallels the whole notion of 1,000 true fans, and especially in fitness, people feel like they need to have these massive followings like others have. But, Todd, you have a in-person gym and, you probably have a couple hundred members there. You don't need a 20,000 person following on Instagram to make that business work and work well.
Right. And sometimes you see the opposite, where people are trying to cultivate that Instagram following and actually struggle with their in-person fitness business. That there's a lot of folks who do well on Instagram as an Instagram influencer, and their in-person business is terrible because it's a totally different model. Right. And one doesn't necessarily translate into the other.
Right.
Totally. I feel like we're hearing more and more stories of, like, was just one the other day, like, this girl, I think, was kicked off Twitch or something, and then she just found that she had no other source of income. And there was no underlying business, or people get kicked off platforms, or there's this other influencer that it came out his mom was working 2 jobs to support his international model lifestyle because he wasn't actually making money. It's like it's hard to make that shift because the feedback loop on social media is so fast. You can create something and seconds later you're getting likes. And
Right.
and the loops in business are not anywhere near that fast, and it can be hard to like push off the fast feedback loop in favor of the long one.
Definitely.
So Tiago, I'm cognizant of your time since I know you gotta jump off shortly. So let's give some folks some direction in terms of where they should go if they want to dig into your stuff. I mean, you mentioned a few specific posts, some online courses. What is the best thing for people to do if this resonated with them and they're like, you know what, I am in fact a productivity freak and I would like to learn more.
Yeah, awesome. Really, these ideas are available in a lot of different forms. If you like books, I package my blog posts into ebooks, which you can find on Amazon. I have a series of 5 or 6 online courses, the blog. I'm very active on Twitter. I have a decent YouTube channel, but really the gateway to all those things is my website, which is Forte Labs, FORTELABS .co, not .com, .co. And you'll see as soon as you go there, along the top of the page is links to all those things I just mentioned. And I would encourage your listeners to reach out to me on Twitter if they have any questions. I'm extremely too active there. It's funny as I just talk shit on social media. I'll be happy to talk.
Well, I can say I got a ton out of even the free posts that are on your blog are really insightful and very helpful for getting started on this sort of thing.
Amazing. Yeah, it's been really great talking to you guys. It's been fun.
Thanks for listening. We've compiled the action items, recommendations, and tools that we and our guests use into a cheat sheet that you can download at FromCoachToBusiness.com. Download that cheat sheet and you can have all that stuff in one convenient location. Check out the rest of the episodes in the season as well for some more actionable information on starting and growing your fitness business.